This podcast comes from the corner of a country lane in the middle of England.
The Talk Genealogy podcast Christmas quiz.
Talk Genealogy, the podcast for genealogists with too much time on their hands.
Good evening, my name is Malcolm Noble and this is Malcolm Noble's Talk Genealogy podcast. The podcast for the genealogists with too much time on their hands. This is episode 73, one in a series of short supplements that we are posting each week leading up to the publication of my new book, A Practical Introduction to Medieval Genealogy, which comes out in February 2026.
The Talk Genealogy podcast looks at different techniques and interesting sources for family historians. Or perhaps a discussion about early genealogists, the pioneers of our science. Sometimes we look at how a famous character in history shows us something particular about genealogy. But hey, most of the time we talk about whatever comes into our head, building an audio library for genealogists with too much time on their hands.
This evening we've had to disrupt the calendar a little bit because it's time to fit into the schedule the Talk Genealogy podcast Christmas quiz. Same as last year, we'll start off with 20 questions, then in the second half of the podcast we'll give you the 20 answers. It's just a bit of fun, but please do let me know how you get on. malcolmnoble@rocketmail.com. We'll find me there ready and waiting. But before we start, I do want to stress as normal that I'm neither a professional nor an expert. I am an enthusiast like you who has spent far too many years digging up his family tree, so often in the wrong place. These podcasts are really no more than me sharing with you some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And as always, please remember I am talking about ancestor hunting in England.
Recommended by Who Do You Think You Are magazine and featured on BBC Radio. Here is Malcolm Noble's Talk Genealogy podcast. The podcast for the genealogists with too much time on their hands. Here is your presenter, Malcolm Noble.
Before we get into tonight's story, I do just want to pick up on a question that arose last week. I spoke about Switzerland slate, but didn't really explain it. So let me tell you now that Switzerland slate is quarried in Leicestershire. Takes its name from Switzerland wood, which is the original site. Its use goes back to Norman times, and it is very valuable because it is hard wearing, it has a rustic appearance, and it is difficult to work with. So it is very popular for gravestones, particularly in the 19th century, but we were talking 100 years earlier. Okay, that's Switzerland slate out of the way. So without more ado, let's get on with the questions. There are no trick questions, alright, they're all straightforward, and very often you'll get them right just by answering what first comes into your head. But the first one, please do not trip up here. The first question: what 3 life events should be recorded in a parish register? So easy, you're saying. What 3 life events should be recorded in a parish register? Question number 2. When did civil registration begin in England? Enclosure and tithe awards describe the redistribution and the commutation of land in written form. Which associated source allows the historian to interpret these? That sounds more complicated than it is. Very simple. Enclosure and tithe awards describe the redistribution and commutation of land in written form. But which associated source allows the historian to interpret these? Question number 4. What was Mr. Phillamore's first name? He was famous, of course, for transcribing so many parish registers and also for founding a publishing house. But what was his first name? And what was Fillmore's famous investigation into a fraudulent genealogy called? What was Fillmore's famous investigation into a fraudulent genealogy called? Ladies and gents, we're up to question 6. F.W. Maitland was famous for the Doomsday Study, refining legal history, or disputes between Horace Round. Okay, F.W. Maitland, famous for what? Doomsday Studies, refining legal history, or disputes with Horace Round. Question number 7. Okay, getting a little bit more intense now. What was the first case brought to the court of chivalry? What was the first case brought to the court of chivalry? Yes, you do know it. You do know it. Dig deep. It's there. Which Burke started the peerage? John or Edmund? Which Burke started the peerage? John or Edmund? Question number 9. What is a frank marriage? F-R-A-N-K. What is a frank marriage? That is question number 9. You want me to go back to question number 7? Of course. The question number 7 was, what was the first case brought to the court of chivalry? Okay. Onwards, question 10. What is a fleet marriage? Question 11. When was the new calendar introduced? The calendar that started the year with the 1st of January rather than the 25th of March. When was that introduced? Question 12. Easy one here. How many locks are required? How many locks were required on a parish chest? Question 13. Okay, we're talking about 1969, the conference at Salt Lake City, and the paper presented by Robert Gunderson. What was it about? To give you a clue, it wasn't politically correct, it wasn't price clipped, and it wasn't personal computer. But those will give you a clue. Question 14. What was the list of William's supporters at Hastings called? What was the list of William's supporters at Hastings called? We have all used the directory, soldiers who died in the Great War. But what is the name of the genealogist who attempted an annotated edition? He didn't complete it, but he did publish parts of it. We're up to question 16 now. In a legal or deposition... In a Latin legal or deposition record, what does the lowercase single letter r indicate when used in recording testimony? In a Latin legal or deposition record, what does the lowercase single letter r indicate when used in a record of the testimony? Nice easy one coming up. What is the relationship between children with different parents but the same great-great-grandfather? What is the relationship between children with different parents but the same great-great-grandfather? Question 18. When was the London Gazette started? Question 18. When was the London Gazette started? And then we have question 19. Which university manages the medieval soldier database? Which university manages the medieval soldier database? And finally, question number 20. Which university has a project to publish all half-tax returns? Well, how did you do? Let's see when we go along with our second part.
TalkGenealogy.com is the website that supports the podcast for genealogists with too much time on their hands. You find a guide to previous episodes, a list of books mentioned in the series, and now and then, a bit of a blog. Recommended by Who Do You Think You Are magazine and featured on BBC Radio. Here is Malcolm Noble's Talk Genealogy podcast. Malcolm Noble has written a practical introduction to medieval genealogy, over 400 pages, covering the sources, their history, and important chapters on evaluation and analysis of evidence, scaling research pathways, and much, much more. Order your pre-publication copy now from Malcolm Noble at rocketmail.com. And now, on with the episode.
The first question related to what's in the parish registers. I hope you didn't go for births and deaths. It is baptisms, marriages, and burials. Question 2 was, when did civil registration start? 1837. How are you doing? That's 2 out of 2. The second one was that tricky one regarding enclosure and tithe awards. Enclosure and tithe awards describe the distribution and commutation of land in written form. Which associated source allows the historian to interpret these changes geographically? And the answer was maps. Oh, goodness me, is it really that easy? Question 4. What was William Phillimore's first name? It was William. What was Phillimore's first name? And it was William. Now then, we do have to allow a little bit of license there. William is the name that he was known by, but if we're being particularly pedantic, it was Westlake Percy William. So William or Westlake will do. And Phillimore's famous case was the Shipway case. The Shipway case was the case regarding a fraudulent genealogy. Question number 6. What was F.W. Mayton famous for? Was he famous for doomsday studies? Yes, he was. Was he famous for refining legal history? Yes, he was. Was he famous for his disputes with Horace Round? Yes, he was. He was famous for all three. Which was the first case brought to the court of chivalry? Now, it was in 1385 to 1390, and it was Scrope versus Grosvenor. Scrope versus Grosvenor. Which Burke? It was John Burke. What is a frank marriage? A frank marriage is where the wife brings no dowry as such, but property which was bequeathed to her by her family on the proviso of marriage. So a frank marriage is one where the bride brings property into the marriage. What were fleet marriages? They were clandestine marriages performed ideally in fleet prison or outside fleet prison or by fleet prison clergy, or you could actually broaden it even more and say it's outside normal parish control, but strictly speaking it is associated with fleet prison. When did we start celebrating New Year? On the 1st of January, that was 1752. Now then, if you said 1751, give yourself a point, because it's how the year is calculated, depending on whether it is 1751 or 1752. That was the change. The number of locks on a parish chest was 3. Now, the paper presented to the World Conference on Records, presented by Robert Gunderson, introduced the concept of pedigree collapse. So that's where PC came in. Pedigree collapse, which is where cousin marriages, I don't want to say interfere, but if you like, complicate ancestry. And the list of companions of the Conqueror are the Battle Abbey roll. Now, I don't know why I put question 15 in, because I can never pronounce the guy's name, to be honest. However, the person who attempted an annotated edition of soldiers who died in the Great War was Melville Henry Massue, the Marquis de Rouvigny, or something like that. Okay, he published it in 5 volumes. That's as far as he got. It was called A Roll of Honour, a biographical record of all members of His Majesty's naval and military forces who have fallen in the war, 14 to 18. It included over 25,000 individual biographies and about 7,000 photographs, so it is really useful. The only problem was he died before he could complete it. But what survives has been published, or rather what he completed has been published. Okay, what does that letter R mean? Let's just remind ourselves of the question. In a Latin legal or deposition record, what does a lowercase single letter R indicate when used in recording testimony? Do you know, I asked the Society of Genealogists this when I used to be a member, and no one could tell me. But the answer is the witness says. So when you see a single lowercase letter R, put in its place the witness says. Question 17, they are 4th cousins. Question 18, the London Gazette, 1665, and holds the place as England's oldest surviving newspaper. Question 19, the database of medieval soldiers is held or managed by the University of Southampton. Now, if you said the University of Sheffield, that's a near miss because they're much involved with it. Okay. And the last question, it's the University of Roehampton that has a project to transcribe all the half tax returns. How did you do? Did you learn anything? Do you want to dispute any of the answers? Oh, I'm up for it. I'm up for it. It's very difficult, you know, to ask a question that directs you to one answer with no alternatives. But I hope that I have provided a little bit of fun. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your support during 2025. I hope we'll see you there in 2026 for more episodes of the Talk Genealogy podcast. My name is Malcolm Noble, and if you got to the end of those 20 questions, then you are the genealogists with too much time on your hands.
Thanks to Freeze Effects for the music and Momna Yunus and Emily Brooks for the voiceovers. This podcast comes from the corner of a country lane in the middle of England.
I want to thank you for listening to tonight's episode and wish you all the best with your family tree hunting. Good night to you and enjoy your Christmas.
Malcolm Noble's books on Nottinghamshire history include A Plague in Bleasby. A Nottinghamshire village survives its summer of death. The plague of 1604 reduced the population of Bleasby, Nottinghamshire, by 30%, a demographic deficit that would not recover for 2 generations. Family documents and local records bring detail to this figure, and when placed in the context of broader history, offer an understanding of the village social and economic dynamics.